we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Eric Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei praises university students in the United States for demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Khamenei says that these students form a new branch of the resistance front. China says it firmly supports the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine. Beijing calls the current situation in Gaza unsustainable. South Korea joins the space race as President Yoon Suk Yeol announces $73 billion for the country's space program. Seoul plans to land on Mars by 2045. Mexico's campaign season ends on a bloody note as cartel gunmen shoot and kill an aspiring mayor. At least 30 candidates have been assassinated so far, giving a chilling backdrop to the country's general election on June 2nd. And Botswana's president labels lab-grown diamonds as a direct threat to his country's economy. Natural diamonds make up 90% of the African nation's exports and over 30% of Botswana's GDP. We begin in the Middle East, where Israeli army expands its operations in Gaza. Israel says it now has complete operational control over the entire Egyptian border with Gaza and the southern city of Rafah. Israel also claims to have discovered 20 tunnels going from Gaza into Egypt. The Israeli army added that Hamas uses the tunnels for smuggling weapons and personnel.
Hamas took advantage of the Philadelphia corridor and built these infrastructures few meters away from the border with Egypt so that we would not attack them. It was in the vicinity of between 10 to 40 meters from the border. So Israel in such way would not attack near the border with Egypt.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's national security advisor says that the operation in Gaza will continue through the end of 2024. And Israel still remains at the center of global condemnation for its attacks on Palestinian civilians in Rafah. Turkey's President Erdogan has lashed out at Netanyahu, calling him a psychopath and a blood-sucking vampire.
The world is watching the barbarism of a sick man, a maniac, a psychopath, and a blood-feeding vampire called Netanyahu, and they are watching it on live broadcasts.
The Turkish president didn't stop at just criticizing Israel. He also accused the United States and Europe for enabling a genocide in Gaza.
Oh, the American state, this blood is on your hands also. You are responsible for this genocide at least as much as Israel. Oh, the heads of state and government of Europe, you have also participated in Israel's genocide, barbarism, and vampire-like act.
Now Erdogan, who has himself been accused of killing hundreds of ethnic Kurds, had some harsh words for Arab and Muslim nations for not taking action against Israel.
I have a few words to say to the Islamic world. What are you waiting for to make a joint decision? What more needs to happen to react? Dogs eat the bodies of martyrs on the streets of Gaza. Israeli terrorists enter the homes of Muslims and share photos from their bedrooms. Muslim children are murdered in hospitals. Babies' necks are torn off. People are burned in tents. When will you see these? When will you react? When will you come together and take a determined stance?
And now joining Erdogan in slamming Israel is Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who is now backing South Africa's complaint against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Brazil has also recalled its ambassador from Israel over Netanyahu's offensive in Rafah. With more than 36,000 Palestinians dead, hundreds of thousands wounded, and over 1 million displaced, Gaza remains the biggest flashpoint between Israel and other nations. In Europe, intelligence officials have warned that the continent is facing a growing threat from Russia's sabotage operations. They say Russia is behind arson and vandalism attacks on infrastructure, and Europe is calling it a new weapon of war. In recent weeks, a spate of mystery fires and attacks on public infrastructure were reported in European nations. Now the intelligence officials believe this to be the early stage of a systematic activation of Russian sleeper cells worldwide. Last month, 2 flights from Finland could not land in Estonia due to jammed GPS. The Finnish transport agency later blamed Moscow for the incident. Meanwhile, Germany arrested 2 dual nationals on suspicion of planning to plant bombs at U.S. military bases in the state of Bavaria. And just last week, Polish authorities arrested 9 people in connection with acts of sabotage allegedly committed on the orders of Russian services. Also in France, investigators are considering whether graffiti recently painted on the Holocaust Memorial in Paris has a Russian link. Meanwhile, fire incidents at an IKEA store in Lithuania and a warehouse in East London were also linked to Moscow. Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Sweden have all reported Russia-backed cyber attacks. Now it's being said the reason for the uptick in sabotage throughout Europe is because these nations are the most dedicated allies of Ukraine. And intelligence officials say Russia's sabotage operations are aimed at shutting down travel, power, and telecommunications, as well as stopping the flow of weapons or destroying the weapons themselves, which will ultimately paralyze Ukraine's military campaign. Now, earlier this year, NATO military chiefs, in fact, warned that a direct war with Russia was likely to erupt in the next 5 to 8 years. And as tensions increase in Ukraine and throughout Europe, all fingers remain pointed directly at Moscow. And here in the United States, former President Donald Trump is reportedly considering tapping billionaire Elon Musk to join his team if the Republican is elected in November. Both Donald Trump and Musk have been in touch with each other since the Republican Party's presumptive presidential candidate launched his 2024 campaign. In fact, reports suggest that the Republican has offered Musk the role of a policy advisor in a Trump administration. The ex-president says he's impressed by Musk's work ethic and would like his input on America's economic and border policies. Now, as jury deliberations continue in the former president's hush money trial, Donald Trump continues his verbal attacks on President Biden. The former president accused President Biden of a political witch hunt, saying even Mother Teresa could not have beaten the charges.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess between the borders and fake elections, and you have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. It's a weaponized deal for the Democrats to hit their political opponent. For Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States. He's destroying our country. He's letting millions of people from jails, from prisons, from insane asylums, from mental institutions, drug dealers pour in. We're going to take back our country from these fascists and these thugs that are destroying us with inflation and with everything they do, how stupid they are, allowing 15, 16, 17 million people into our country, totally unvetted, totally unchecked.
Now, Elon Musk has also been a vocal critic of the Biden administration's border management, and Musk has repeatedly accused President Biden of allowing illegal immigrants into the country without providing any evidence to back these accusations. In recent years, Musk has been growing closer to the grand old party and to Donald Trump himself. In fact, Musk and Donald Trump met in March at the former president's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. And it was at that meeting where Musk informed Trump about his ongoing campaign to influence American entrepreneurs and business leaders to vote against President Biden. Now, Elon Musk was, in fact, a longtime supporter of the Democratic Party and openly backed former President Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, and even President Biden in 2020. However, things changed in 2021 when the Tesla CEO had a major falling out with the Biden administration after not being invited to the White House for a summit hosting America's top EV manufacturers. The billionaire entrepreneur now openly backs the Republican Party, and in a race that's expected to have a razor-thin finish, one has to wonder, does Elon Musk support or hurt Trump's chances in November? And speaking of problematic men, the Australian state of Victoria has found a unique way to tackle them. It's appointed a minister to improve men's behavior, which is the country's first ever such position. But not many Australians are happy with the announcement, as they believe this new position actually demonizes men. Australia is currently struggling, however, with an epidemic of gender-based violence, with 31 women being killed since the beginning of this year. Our next report goes inside the creation of this new ministry and how the nation is in fact responding.
With incidents of violence against women increasing day by day, Australia has found a unique way to tackle the crisis. In the country's first, the state of Victoria has appointed a special official who will be responsible with improving men's behaviour. Victoria Premier Jacinta Allen has announced that a local member of Parliament, Tim Richardson, would hold the role of Parliamentary Secretary for men's behaviour change. The state is governed by the Australian Labor Party, which deems itself a progressive force for women. Now, Richardson has acknowledged that the work will not be easy. He says he will focus largely on how the internet affects men's attitudes towards women and how they can build respectful relationships. Richardson adds, and I quote, "We know that the time to act on men's violence against women is now, and it starts with us men and boys. We must make Victoria a safer place for women and children and work to end the tragedy of deaths of Victorian women at the hands of men." Australia has been struggling with an epidemic of gender-based violence. According to the Counting Dead Women project, 31 women have been killed throughout the country since the beginning of this year. Last year, a total of 64 women were murdered. And individual stories that have emerged in recent months have been horrific. Last month, 5 women were murdered by a man armed with a knife at a shopping centre in Sydney. Last weekend, a mother and her daughter fell victim to gun violence in Perth. In another case, a woman was killed by her partner, who was already facing charges of raping and stalking her, but had been released on bail. Now, Richardson's new role has given a glimpse of hope to many, but not all Australians are happy with the announcement. The opposition Liberal Party's Jane Hume has expressed scepticism about its effectiveness, saying the move looked like window dressing. Meanwhile, critics on social media say that Richardson's job would be to demonize men and feminize the culture. Some users have also accused the Victoria state government of blaming all men for crimes against women and called for reforms to fix bail laws to keep the offenders locked up. Now, while the new position only exists at a state level, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese believes men across Australia have to take responsibility. Earlier this month, he called the growing violence a national crisis.
This is indeed a national crisis, and it's a national challenge. And we're facing this with a spirit of national unity. Today is about who we are as a nation and as a society. We recognise that governments need to act, but we also recognise that this is an issue for the whole of society, not just for governments. We want to change this in a way in which we all have to take responsibility, because violence against women is not a women's problem to solve. It is a whole of society problem to solve, and men in particular have to take responsibility.
His government has pledged almost $1 billion to help women leave abusive relationships. It has also announced a ban on deepfake pornography to combat violence against women and age verification to protect children from harmful online content. The measures came after tens of thousands protested in cities across Australia to draw attention to the rising deaths of women caused by gender-based violence.
And finally to Italy. After centuries of playing gracious host, Italy is saying enough is enough. The land of pizza and picture-perfect scenery is breaking up with tourists. Italy and its locals are clamping down on the tourist influx, and authorities are imposing bans on fines on just about everything they can think of, from taking selfies to wearing flip-flops. Here's our Italy travel advisory report.
How does a perfect vacation look like? Snapping endless selfies. Taking a dip or a daring hike. Trading your suit and tie for flip-flops. And most importantly, meandering without a care in the world. But if you're in the beautiful landscapes of Italy, things might be a bit different. The land of mouth-watering cuisine and picture-perfect destinations draws millions of tourists every year. However, it seems the charm of visitors is starting to wear thin on local Italians. Authorities are rolling out bans on just about everything. Italy's bond with tourists dates back centuries. Recently, though, the surge in visitors is straining its picturesque neighborhoods and people, and Italy wants to redefine its relationship with tourists. Is Italy thinking about a breakup? Just like in any healthy relationship, boundaries are key, and Italy, a country that adores its visitors, wants to keep things smooth. To do that, they have set some ground rules. Italy has started to crack down on certain tourist behaviors that irk the locals. Here are some examples. In Portofino, forget about posing for selfies, it's a finable offense. They've created no waiting zones to manage the crowds. Venice has waved goodbye to giant cruise ships, keeping its historic heart safe from oversized vessels. Even day trippers now have to pay a fee to visit Venice.
This system is very important because we are finding a new balance between the residents, the community, and the day trippers. So we are just trying to discourage the arriving on day trippers in 29 particular days, and finding a new way to know in advance how many people will arrive in Venice the day after.
Rome's iconic Spanish Steps. Don't even think about sitting there, it's illegal. And in Cinque Terre, ditch those flip-flops. If you're planning on hiking cliffs, get a pair of hiking shoes or pay a fine amounting to thousands of dollars. It is to reduce the strain on mountain rescue teams. Locals argue for a harmony between nature and humanity. Italian residents believe that a balance between nature and tourism is essential. They acknowledge that while tourism boosts the economy, it can also harm the environment. So what's the way forward? Italians do have suggestions. Some want regulating the flow of visitors and redirecting them to less crowded areas. Others want the government to tax tourists more and enforce more regulations, like banning swimming in Venice's canals. Because Venice is an art city, not a beach resort. Despite these measures, Italy isn't shutting the door on tourism. Minister for Tourism Daniela Santanchè feels there aren't too many tourists. She wants to improve the country's organization and management of visitors, so that the country can welcome more tourists profitably. After all, tourism accounts for over 10% of Italy's GDP. So, while Italy still welcomes tourists with open arms, it's also laying down the law to ensure that its love affair with visitors doesn't turn into a burden. The country is striving for a sustainable and respectful relationship that benefits everyone. So if tourists respect the rules, Italy will love them right back.
That's our show for today. We certainly thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.